"Get your things and vacate the room immediately," my father said, not even looking me in the eye as he gestured toward the hallway where my older brother, Leo, stood smirked with his new bride, Sarah. I stood there, paralyzed, holding a lukewarm mug of coffee while my entire world tilted on its axis, realizing that the home I had maintained, paid for, and lived in for 30 years was being handed over like a party favor to a brother who hadn't called in half a decade. I want you to look at me and tell me honestly. If your own flesh and blood threw you out onto the street after you spent your youth being their primary caregiver and financial backbone, would you just walk away quietly, or would you burn every bridge on your way out? Was I wrong for what I did next, or did they get exactly what they deserved for mistaking my kindness for weakness? To understand how we got to that cold afternoon in November, you have to understand the dynamic of the Miller family, or rather, the lack of one. I am the youngest of two. My brother Leo was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong even when he was doing everything wrong. He left for college 10 years ago and essentially never looked back, only calling when his bank account hit zero or when he needed a cosigner for a car he couldn't afford. I, on the other hand, stayed. When my mother passed away 7 years ago, I was the one who held my father's hand. I was the one who navigated the funeral arrangements, the one who cooked the meals, and the one who made sure the property taxes were paid. My father, Arthur, had always been a man of traditional, if not outdated, values. He believed in the right of the firstborn, a concept he clung to like a life raft even as Leo ignored his existence for years at a time. I worked a demanding job as a paralegal at a high-end firm in the city, but I stayed in my childhood home because, frankly, my father couldn't manage it alone. The house was a sprawling, old Victorian that required constant upkeep. I poured my savings into the new roof, the updated plumbing, and the renovation of the kitchen. I didn't mind at the time because I thought I was investing in my future and my father's comfort. There was never a formal lease, but there was an understanding, or so I thought. Then came the phone call 3 weeks ago. Leo was coming home, and he wasn't alone. He had married Sarah, a woman none of us had ever met, in a whirlwind ceremony in Las Vegas. They were starting over and needed a place to stay. I figured they would take the guest room for a week or two while they looked for an apartment. I even went out and bought fresh linens and a welcome home basket. But the moment they walked through the door, the atmosphere shifted. Sarah didn't look like someone looking for a temporary place to crash. She looked like someone conducting a property inspection. She commented on the crown molding, the size of the master suite, which I had been using since my mother died because my father moved to the ground floor bedroom for his knees, and the potential of the backyard. When dinner was served that first night, the bomb dropped. Leo mentioned they were tired of renting and wanted to settle down in the family estate. My father nodded vigorously, his eyes shining with a pride he never showed for my career or my contributions. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, until my father cleared his throat and told me that since Leo was the head of the next generation of Millers, it was only right he took the primary living quarters. He told me I had 48 hours to move my things into the unfinished basement, or better yet, find a small studio in town so the newlyweds could have their privacy. I was floored. I reminded him that I had paid the property taxes for the last 3 years. I reminded him that I had paid for his knee surgery out of pocket when his insurance dipped. I reminded him that Leo hadn't even sent a Christmas card in 3 years. My father just waved his hand dismissively and said, "Family is family, and the house belongs to the name Miller." That's when it clicked. He didn't see me as a daughter or a partner in keeping the family afloat. I was just a placeholder. Sarah had the audacity to chime in, saying that she already had a decorator coming on Monday to look at my room. I spent that night in a hotel, too angry to sleep and too betrayed to cry. But as I sat in that sterile hotel room, I remembered something my father had forgotten in his old age and his desperation to please his golden son. My mother wasn't just a housewife. She was a woman who had inherited a significant portion of the estate from her own family, and she was far more legally savvy than my father gave her credit for. I went to my office the next morning and pulled the digital archives of her will and the property deed. Before I tell you what I found in those documents and how I used my professional expertise to turn their world upside down, I want you to stop and think about the sheer entitlement of this situation. I had spent tens of thousands of dollars and a decade of my life maintaining that home, only to be told to move into a damp basement so a stranger could sleep in my bed. What would you do? Would you pack your bags and move on for the sake of peace? Or would you fight for every cent and every brick you worked for? Drop a comment right now and tell me if I'm being bitter or if I'm justified in seeking total scorched earth justice. I really want to see where you guys stand before I reveal the next part. The documents were a goldmine. It turns out, when my mother passed, she didn't leave the house entirely to my father. She had set up a tiered life estate. My father had the right to live there until his passing, but the actual ownership of the property was held in a trust, of which I was the sole trustee and the primary beneficiary upon his death, and this was the crucial bit, if the property was ever abandoned or mismanaged by the life tenant. Furthermore, because I had been paying the taxes and the mortgage from my personal accounts for 7 years without a formal rental agreement, and because my father had signed several maintenance reimbursement agreements I drafted over the years, which he never read, just signed because he was lazy, he actually owed me a debt that exceeded his equity in the remaining life estate value. But there was a bigger catch. When my mother bought the house, she did it with an inheritance that was strictly partitioned from communal marital property. My father didn't own the house, the trust did. And as the trustee, I had the power to dictate occupancy rules if the life tenant attempted to transfer possession to third parties without the trustee's consent. I didn't say a word for 2 days. I let them move my things. I watched from the driveway as Leo threw my boxes into the garage. I watched Sarah peel off the wallpaper I had painstakingly put up 3 years ago. On the 3rd day, I walked in with a folder. I didn't go to my father first. I went to the kitchen where they were all sitting, eating a breakfast I had paid for. I handed Leo a formal eviction notice. He laughed, literally spitting out some orange juice. "You can't evict us, sis. Dad gave us the house." I turned to my father and handed him the notice of termination of life estate. I explained, in very cold professional terms, that by attempting to gift or transfer primary residence rights to a third party without the trust's permission, he had breached the terms of the life estate my mother had established. I also presented him with an itemized bill for $142,000, the total of the taxes, repairs, and medical bills I had covered, which were legally structured as liens against his interest in the property. The color drained from his face. Sarah started screaming about how I couldn't do this, that they were family. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Family doesn't throw family into a basement. You're a guest in a house owned by a trust you have no part of. And as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, your guest status has been revoked." My father tried to bluster, saying he'd take me to court. I reminded him that I work for the top real estate litigation firm in the state and that my boss, who happens to find my family's behavior repugnant, had already agreed to represent the trust pro bono. I gave them 24 hours to leave. They didn't believe me. They stayed. So the next morning, I arrived with the sheriff and a locksmith. It was the most satisfying and heartbreaking moment of my life. Seeing my father's suitcase on the porch next to Leo's gym bags felt like a weight being lifted, even if it hurt. Leo tried to swing at the sheriff and ended up in handcuffs, which Sarah had to bail him out of with what little money they had left. My father had to move into a small, state-subsidized senior living facility because he had no savings. He'd spent it all on investments. Leo had pitched him over the years. I sold the house 3 weeks later. I didn't want the memories anymore. I took the proceeds, paid off the liens to myself, and put the rest into a high-yield account for my own future. I haven't spoken to them since. Lee sent me a long, rambling email calling me a monster, but I just blocked him. I realized that being the good daughter was just a role I played to keep people happy who didn't care if I was shivering in a basement as long as they were comfortable. At the end of the day, I learned that blood doesn't make you family. Respect and loyalty do. I spent years building a home for people who were ready to tear it down the moment someone better came along. If you find yourself in a position where your kindness is being treated as a doormat, remember that you have the power to lock the door. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by putting myself first for once. Subscribe for more stories about people finding their backbone and giving the golden children of the world a reality check. And please, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut off a family member to save your own sanity? I'll see you all in the next story.